All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the 50k health par damage build. I know this is a build that you have seen from me in the past. If this is your first time seeing this build, well, we are basically a 50k hit point Templar build that can still hit pretty freaking hard. And with this iteration of the build, we have got some really insane health-based healing power, thanks to the new patch giving Templar a whole bunch of health-based heals. On top of that, this build has one of, if not the cheapest dodge roll out of any build in the game. The dodge roll cost for this guy is 1,000 stamina when we have a damage shield up. So Arcane Alacrity doing some serious work for the health plar this patch. In the end, I think that this is probably the strongest iteration of this build yet, and this is one heck of a good patch to be playing something like this. Of course, if you guys want to catch that written guide, you can find it on my website, KristoferESO.com. And without further ado, let's take a look at that build. So to start off, we are an Orc on this Templar, and I think Orc is definitely the best in-slot race choice for a build like this. We get weapon damage, max stam, and maximum health, all stats that we really need for this build. But any stam race will work pretty well. Wood Elf is always a good option. Redguard is not bad either, and Khajiit isn't a terrible choice. You could even do a Dark Elf for this build. Now let's move on to our stats here. We're going to start off on our back bar here so you guys can see that maximum health value. We got the 15k Magicka, 19k Stamina, and 49.9k health, so just shy of 50k HP. You can see in my attributes here, I actually aimed to have around that 50k hit points, and then I put the rest of my points into stamina. We don't have a huge stamina pool on this build, but we have probably the cheapest dodge roll that you can get in the game. When you look at the cost of our roll here, we've got an 1,800 dodge roll cost, and we are running that beautiful Arcane Alacrity, bringing us down to a 1,000 dodge roll cost on this build. You can get this down to 800 if you're running the last piece of Well Fitted. I'm actually missing it because I have not transmuted one of my pieces of gear. So this means that we can roll 2 to 3 times before our stamina bar will even start to feel it. This is a really huge deal for a build like this. One of the biggest issues I've had in the past is lack of mobility. So that Arcane Alacrity passive plus the cheap dodge roll from Well Fitted goes a really long way. Now, let's take a look at the sustain that we've got on the build. We're going to drink our Tri-Stat Potion. Important that we have that for our major buffs. We got 1,600 Magicka recovery, 1,379 health recovery, and 2,261 stam recovery. So pretty good sustains across the board. We have a little bit less stamina recovery than you'd expect on a stamina build, but we kind of make up for that with the higher Magicka recovery. We've got quite a few very powerful Magicka skills, including one of our best heals is a Magicka heal too. So you definitely want to have a higher Magicka recovery for a build like this. And then that whopping health recovery comes from our Gaze of Sithis pretty much. And I know that health recovery has been nerfed in the recent patch, but having a little bit of health recovery still goes a long way. I would recommend using the higher quality food that gives you health recovery too, because it does help out in the long run. Now let's take a look at our weapon damage on this build when we buff up with our rally. We've got 4,854 weapon damage. We've got a Vatron Greatsword and infused back bar with the weapon spell damage enchant. That's going to push us all the way to about 5.7k weapon damage. I am in a campaign that gives me about a 2% weapon damage bonus, but without the bonus, you'll hit about 5.7k weapon damage on this build, which is pretty respectable, I think, because we have quite a lot of physical penetration to back it up. There's a lot of damage going around in the patch right now, so the actual amount of damage that you need to kill another player is much lower, I think, than it has been historically, and you can definitely get away with about 5.7k weapon damage if you've got a good amount of penetration to back it up. Now, looking on to our next stat here, we've got 28% weapon critical on our front bar, and then on the back bar, we've got 22% weapon crit. This is not really a crit build, but that little bit of extra crit chance can come in handy for your healing, as well as your outgoing damage with jabs. And then we've got that penetration stat. We got 8.4k flat physical penetration. We are running the Stuns Favor set. That's going to give us an additional 5.3k pen, and then we also have Minor Breach from Power of the Light. So this is going to give us a total of 9k kind of invisible penetration on top, putting us at around 17.5 to almost 18k physical penetration. I also have a Vatron Greatsword. This is not ideal. I think you'd rather have the Maul here because penetration is the better damage dealing stat. And our heals are mostly scaling off of our hit points, so we don't actually need the additional weapon damage here versus the penetration. It is the better damage for PvP, so we could push over 20k penetration on this build if we had the ideal gear set up for it. Now let's take a look at the physical and spell resist when we have our buff up here. We've got 27k physical resist and 30.4k spell resist, and then 1980 critical resistance. These are not bad defensive stats. They aren't anything too crazy. We're approaching cap on our spell resist, and we're not too far off on our physical resist either. And yeah, this is thanks to that Gaze of Sithis set for the most part. We are running a backbar hit point set that gives us a little bit additional armor. Because damage is so high this patch, you can't go wrong with having a little bit more armor than you would normally run. And this build, especially being kind of healing focused, benefits a lot from having a little bit higher armor values. Now, let's take a look at the Mundus that we're running on this bad boy. We've got the Lover Mundus for penetration. This is definitely best in slot for outgoing damage. You could change this to something else if you wanted to change up the build a little bit. I would say that the Lady is even a good option if you want to stack a little bit more defensive utility on this guy. And then, of course, we've got the Orzorga's Smoked Bear Haunch as our food of choice. You can't go wrong with Orzorga's. This is pretty much the best statistic food in the game. You get a ton of stat out of this, and you get stats that you can amplify through your gear, like medium armor is going to give us even more stamina recovery off of the base value here. The max health, so important for the build too. All the sustains, yeah. And if you guys don't want to spend the money on the Bear Haunch, you can always go for the Jewels of Misrule. It's going to give you a little bit less total recovery, and then you're not going to get any of the health recovery at all, as well as a little bit less maximum health, but it is a very cheap alternative if you don't want to pay for that expensive gold food. Alright, so let's take a look at the gear we're running on this build. The first set, of course, is that new mythic set, the Gaze of Sithis. This is such a good set for a PvP build. I mean, you get max health, you get health recovery, and you get armor. It will reduce your block mitigation to 0, however, so it's not going to be great for a build that needs to block a lot, but this build that we're playing here, it is a roll build. You don't need to block on it. You do want to block sometimes to prevent an incoming stun at a bad moment, but outside of that, we're not using our block to mitigate damage because we can just use our heal away hit points to do that. Yeah, fantastic set for this build. Durability, max health, recovery, perfect. Moving on to our next set here, we've got a 5-piece Stuns Favor just in our gear. This is going to give us that additional penetration when we use our Toppling Charge to stun people. It will also set them off balance, and we get that big physical penetration buff. The 2, 3, 4 piece on this are also really nice for our outgoing damage. Stuns Favor, in my opinion, is one of the best damage sets in the game for just a pure stats damage build, so Templar does a really good job utilizing this set thanks to our unique gap closer. Now, moving on to the next set here, we have got a single piece of the Trainee. This is to give us a little bit more maximum health, and yeah, that's pretty much it. We want to stack health on this build, so you know why we got it. And then for our back bar, we have got the Warrior Poet set. Warrior Poet, just a fantastic set for this build. Our heals are going to scale off the max health, and they actually scale based on the bar they were cast on. So if you cast it on your back bar and switch to the front bar where you have less HP, you actually get the same healing value with the heals that we're using, which is super awesome. So it's just important for us to have them on this back bar. And we're going to get a lot out of this set besides that hit point value. We also get almost 3k armor value. Really nice, about a 5% damage reduction. And Minor Toughness is a particularly good stat nowadays because people's base hit points are a lot higher than they used to be. So you get quite a lot out of this 5-piece. And they snuck in the 1581 max health on the 5-piece too. Just a great set all around for what we want to do here. And then, of course, on the front bar, we've got that last set, the Vatron Greatsword. This is nice to help us build a little bit more additional weapon damage on the front bar. On top of it, we get that Vatron Explosion. We don't have the hugest weapon damage amount on this build, so the Vatron Explosion, the proc off of it, isn't going to deal the most amount of damage, but it's still going to be additional burst on top of what you're doing, which is always nice when you want to combo somebody out. And of course, let's take a look at the traits we're running on this guy. The back bar is infused with the weapon spell damage enchant. You could also run defending on the back bar if you want to, or even powered if you want to amplify the healing a little bit further. But I went with infused because I wanted to have enough damage on this guy to make sure we could still kill players. And then moving on to the front bar, we've got sharpened with the poison damage enchant. Definitely sharpened on the front bar weapon. We're not using any of the heals here, except really vigor, I guess, but it's not that important since it's not as strong as our hit point heals are combined. And then when we take a look at our jewelry here, we've got a full set of healthy, and quite the glyph combo. We've got 2 tri-stat recovery glyphs and then 1 stamina recovery glyph. Depending on the race of the character you pick, you'll change up your glyphs here to aim for about the sustain values that I have. Healthy as the jewelry trade option is actually not bad at all. Ideally, I think you'd want to go for Triune or even Protective if you wanted a little bit more armor. But Healthy's great because it allows us to hit that 50k health value, essentially amplifying our healing. And any additional health that we don't want over that 50k value, we can just put into max stam, which we do desperately need as well. Now, moving on to our gear here, it is all well fitted, save our Sithis piece, but this should be well fitted as well. And then the glyphs are all the same too. We've got the tri-stat glyphs on here. This is a very important part of the gear. You want to run all well fitted on this build because it makes your roll dodge almost, almost free at times. I mean, look at this roll dodge here. We can roll forever off of no stamina bar. It's absolutely insane. So well fitted is a huge part of that, and upgrading it to gold, unfortunately, makes it a lot more effective too. Purple will be just fine, but if you want to feel the full effects of this build, the full gold well fitted will get you there. And yeah, the tri-stat glyphs also super important. We need all three of these stats. Your max mag pool is actually pretty important because we have a lot of magicka skills that we cast on this build too. And finally, we are running a mix, 5 medium armor, 1 heavy piece, and 1 light piece. And this is just to give us the highest maximum hit point value that we can, as well as increasing the max stat on our stamina and magicka thanks to those undaunted passives. You could actually get the roll dodge cost down to about 600 stamina if you ran 7 medium on the build. It's up to the user. You give up quite a bit of hit points for that, but you also make up for it with a little bit more weapon damage. So again, up to you guys if you want to try that route. All right, so let's take a look at the skills that we're running on this build. Starting off on our greatsword bar, this of course is going to be your damage dealing bar. We also have a couple heals here, but let's take a look at it. The first one we have here is biting jabs. This is going to be, so we're going to buff up with rally so you guys can kind of get a feel of the tooltips. Here we go, biting jabs at that 3.3k physical damage times 4 to the opponent in front of you, snaring them, and of course giving us that major savagery buff. We already have that on the front bar, but it's nice because then it will carry over to our back bar for 8 seconds too. This is our primary spammable. If you hit them 4 times, it guarantees to proc the burning light as well. We've got a lot of penetration. We can do quite a lot of hurt to somebody with jabs on this build. Even a tankier target with the burning light included, you can chunk them for 6 to 7k jabs, which people don't expect when you have this amount of hit points. Something to keep in mind is that people do not expect you to hit nearly as hard as you can on a build like this. Now, moving on to our next ability, we've got Toppling Charge. Very important because this is our primary stun, and it is also access to off balance, proccing our stun's favor set. Gotta have it. I really like Toppling Charge as a gap closer. You follow up this stun with jabs, and people have a really tough time dealing with it. Definitely one of Templar's best abilities, even on a Stamplar. And then moving on to the next skill, we've got Camouflaged Hunter. This is here for that major savagery buff that it provides on our front bar. We also get minor berserk when we hit an opponent's flank and land a critical hit, which is quite easy to do with the rapid attack from jabs. And then on top of it, we get 3% additional weapon damage for slotting this on our front bar. You can also use this as a stealth detect. That being said, if your opponent is within jab range, you might just want to use jabs as well. But this is an option too. Now moving on to our next skill, we have got Rally. I would actually recommend not using Rally here and using Forward Momentum instead. I just wanted to try out Rally throughout some of my gameplay, and I didn't mind the burst heal. It wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't necessary with all the other healing sources we have on the build. I think having the snare removal from the other more Forward Momentum would go a little further for the gameplay, so I gotta recommend that one here, even though I have the wrong skill slotted for you guys. And then for the heal on the front bar, we have got Resolving Vigor. I'm going to sit in my circle so you guys can see the tooltip on Vigor. 20k health over 4 seconds. It's not terrible. It's not amazing. It's kind of just a medium amount for a Vigor. So yeah, we'll take that. This is not where the bulk of our healing will come from. This is just a part of the healing equation. This is basically going to be your stamina-based heal. And then for the ultimate on our front bar, we have got that Dawnbreaker of Smiting. We buff up with the Rally, 13.7k physical damage to enemies in front of you. And of course, we got a 13.7k dot on that over 6 seconds. This is a really nice ultimate because it stuns everybody too. When you Dawnbreaker into jabs on a Templar, you can put out a ton of AoE pressure, and Dawnbreaker is going to be an important part of this build's combo because it will allow you to catch people with the stun and big damage at the same time, and then go in for the finish with those jabs. We don't have an execute on the front bar, so you got to use jabs to finish people off, and I find Dawnbreaker is a really good option for that too, because you can catch people in between rolls with this guy as well. Now, you could also run the Templar ultimate into Crescent Sweep for the additional damage, kind of up to the user, but I think the stun from Dawnbreaker is definitely worth the while. Now, moving on to our back bar, the first ability we have is Power of the Light. This is here for that minor breach that it provides, important for our outgoing damage, as well as the additional burst that we get when we put the Power of the Light on the opponent, and it gives them up to that maximum of an 11k smack 6 seconds later. This is not an insane amount of damage for Power of the Light, I know, but with the armor debuff that it provides, I think it's 100% worth it, and on a build like this, having additional burst definitely doesn't hurt, and I think this is the best accessory burst skill that Templar has, even when it has this lower value. Now, moving on to our next ability, we have got Living Dark. This is pretty much your primary magicka heal for the build. If you can help it while in combat, you want to keep this up pretty much all the time. It is really strong on this build. On our back bar, we've got a 3.8k heal tooltip. Let's stand in our circle so we can see that. 4.1k health every half a second while you're under attack. Now, keep in mind that this heal will only proc when an opponent attacks you, but it makes you really resistant to certain attacks like another Templar's Jab that is a very rapid attack. You heal a huge amount off of it, usually healing for more than the opponent's attack will do to you. On top of it, this will snare everybody that hits you with a direct damage attack for 60% for 6 seconds. That is massive, especially for the kite game of this build. We can be fast because we snare everybody that attacks us on top of it. And we've got a lot of rolling power, so it allows us to actually break distance and get away from really bad situations, which is something a build like this can really struggle with if you don't properly build for it. Long story short, this is an incredible heal for a max health Templar, and a huge reason that this build feels so strong. Moving on to our next skill, we've got Radiant Ward. Now, I didn't go with Blazing Shield, even though Blazing Shield will do more damage with the return from it. Radiant Ward will deal a pretty minimal amount of damage, but it has a slightly larger shield size if there's opponents next to you, and on top of it, it's cheaper than Blazing Shield. This shield isn't necessarily here very much for protection either. It's mostly here to proc our Arcane Alacrity. If you're dodging a lot of attacks, the shield will not break very quickly at all. So essentially what you want to do is just go for the Radiant Ward and then spam roll dodge afterwards to get away from that bad situation. If somebody stuns you, you break the stun, throw another Radiant Ward up, and then spam roll, cancel your other heals in between. But it's very important that if you're going to use roll a lot, that you put this shield up first, because it really saves your stamina bar. So yeah, it's kind of a nice defensive utility. It gives us an interesting kind of playstyle that I don't think any other class really has access to, at least not a magicka based shield like this that they can use in a medium armor build so effectively. So yeah, really cool skill. I've enjoyed using this a lot. You guys will see in the gameplay how important this is for mobility. Then moving on to our next skill here, we've got Extended Ritual. You cannot go wrong with a Purge. 5 harmful negative effects away from yourself, as well as that heal over time, and your allies can also synergize it for an additional heal and Purge for themselves. Yeah, there's a lot of dots going around. There's a lot of negative effects like curses, etc. that can do a lot of damage. We can't use block to defend ourselves, so Purge becomes a very important utility to help keep us alive. This is going to be the probably second most intensive magicka skill that you use behind the Living Dark. And then finally, for our last skill here, we have got Restoring Focus. This is access to that armor buff, of course, and we get an additional 241 stamina every 1 second. That's going to be about 484 stamina recovery or so from casting this rune. So it's going to be big for our sustain. And then finally, with the new patch, this rune will also heal you while you're standing in it every 1 second. I'm going to show you guys the healing value on the rune with no healing buffs on us outside of our own, so we're not standing by a keep. We've got a 2k heal every 1 second off of this, so that's the equivalent of 4,000 health recovery. That's a massive heal. When it's not even critting, it's pretty much equivalent to our Vigor. You can see the Vigor heal is coming in at 2,085. So yeah, It is a very, very cheap, very, very powerful heal. The only downside to it is that you have to stand in the rune to actually get this heal. So it does kind of change your playstyle to kind of like camping a location, but this build has the healing power to camp a location if it sets itself up properly. And then finally, for the ultimate on the back bar, I have gone with Temporal Guard. You can use whatever ult you want on the back bar, actually. You don't have to use Temporal Guard. I just like it because the teleport can be incredibly useful to save yourself from a really bad situation or kite away from a huge group of players. We don't really need that minor protection because we do gain it from casting our Radiant Ward. That being said, you're not always casting your ward, but you do throw out a lot of jabs and toppling charge too. So we're pretty much covered in the minor protection department, but yeah, it is nice, I guess, if you get ganked or something and don't have your buffs up. Now, let's take a look at the champion points on this guy. Starting off in our blue tree here, of course, you just want to put all of your passives in pretty much. The important passives are always going to be things like your max stam, and the crit chance, I think, is not a bad one to invest in. You definitely want the penetration from piercing. But besides those passives, we have also chosen 4 of our stars. The first one we have is Biting Aura for a total of 10% damage increase with our area of effect attacks. All of our attacks are AoEs outside of our Magicka stun, which does not deal a lot of damage, and it's simply used to kind of set our combo. So this is awesome. The next ability we have is Mastered Arms for a 10% direct damage increase. All of our attacks, again, are direct damage outside of the dot from Dawnbreaker, so this is really good too. And then we've got Endless Endurance for 1300 additional maximum stamina. I was a little torn what to run here. Of course, Untamed Aggression is going to give you more weapon damage and more for your healing, and even Wrathful Strikes if you wanted to amplify just your damage as far as possible with the base weapon spell damage. But I ended up going with this guy because we needed that max stam. We don't have a lot of max stat to work with on this build. This will still amplify our damage. More importantly, it actually amplifies our power of the light damage, which we don't want to be too low at a 19k stam pool. So there you go. I went with Endless Endurance. You guys can switch this out to something else if you want. Even a healing option would be really good. But this is one that I, after testing the build, decided I think was worth using. And then the next one we have here is Resilience for that 660 critical resistance. You can't go wrong with critical resist. Crits are absolutely insane right now, so they're dealing a lot of damage. This will give you about a 10% critical damage reduction. Really nice stuff. Moving on to the red tree, you definitely want to put all your passives in here again. The really important ones that you want to invest in, look, I don't even have them all, is going to be Tumbling for that roll dodge cost reduction. That mixed with Arcane Alacrity, which is going to give us an 800 cost reduction, is a huge part of why we can roll so much, and a huge part of how this build can remain so mobile for these small pools that it has. So yeah, definitely want to invest in those first. Taking a look at the stars, of course, we have that Arcane Alacrity star. We've gone over it. Very important for this build's rolling to make it very cheap. We also have Ironclad here for that additional armor. Always nice. We've got Rejuvenation for 150 of each recovery. Really important. We benefit a lot from all of this. And then finally, we've got that additional maximum health from Boundless Vitality, and that's to give us those bigger shield sizes as well as those bigger health point-based heals. Of course, Hero's Vigor for the passive, an important one to invest in. Alright guys, let's jump into that PvP commentary. So, we're going to start off with a defense on a friendly keep here. You can see we come through the door, hit a guy with a pottle, and we throw the Dawnbreaker down. 2 fairly squishy opponents there. Just feed them a couple jabs, and we quickly get some kills. I don't notice, though, that the yellow player's quickly picking up their dead, and we don't keep anybody down. But yellow starts pouring into the back here slowly, and I think I decide, yeah, we're not going to stick around here. It's a little bit too much pressure. Making sure, though, to keep our bubble up as we're getting attacked. That bubble is absolutely massive to have up when your opponents are dropping combos on you. And then we're just going to come around the front of the keep. A blue player's attacking a yellow. We just help him a little bit to finish him off. And then the yellow players converge on the blue, and we're just going to look for a good target here. Get a good stun on this guy from behind. A lot of crits on those jabs there. We put a lot of damage into that guy. Now, this enemy player hits us with the stun, and I go for a kite back into the keep, just so we don't get too much pressure on top of us, and this guy follows us. Now, you guys are going to see the big downside, I think not just to maybe just this build, but today's PvP meta in general. It's you're either tanky or you're playing a gank build, and we come by another Nightblade here that is also on a very bulky build, and the body block from the guards makes it more frustrating. He decides we're not going to keep that up. I decide we're going to stop that too. and just a little bit of a skip there. I just run around for a little bit, eventually engage with the yellow player there, hit him with the stun, try to go for damage. The Nightblade responds well, and right away, as soon as we start getting hit, we make sure to put our bubble up. And you can see here, we've got a lot of distance to cover. We go for that blazing shield, and then we're going to whip off a whole bunch of dodge rolls. You can see how little those rolls cost thanks to that arcane alacrity. This is something you would not be able to even kind of do if we didn't have that damage shield up. So it's very important for our mobility that we have that shield up, and you see it there. We have just 2 players that overextend. The first one, very squishy. We hit him with the Dawnbreaker into jabs. The second one dies almost just to a full jabs. It's very, very squishy, like 16k HP. And we're just going to reset our buffs here and attempt to res these red players here. They actually don't end up taking the res though, so that was actually what I had cut out a little bit earlier, was the first attempt at res there, and they just didn't want to take it. So I go for the Power of the Light, and we start hitting this guy with some jabs, putting some good pressure into him. This player here just doesn't respond very well. Instead of healing himself, he runs over to the red bodies to teabag them, and we're just going to finish him with the jabs. And we got a bunch of yellow players jumping on top of us. Here you can see we go for the Blazing Shield again to make sure we can make those roll dodges into safety, throw down that healing circle, and you can see our health just shoot right back up while we stand in it. And the enemy Nightblade engages with us here. We hit him with a big Dawnbreaker there into the jabs, and that player goes down. Actually, I think that might have been a Mag Sork, not the Nightblade. And we just right away move on to our next opponent there. But that was a nice kill because you got to see just one-on-one the amount of burst that we can have. I find oftentimes with this build, it's not that we can't kill the target, it's that when we're outnumbered, it becomes really hard for us to finish the whole combo on somebody because we're constantly getting attacked and stunned by other players. But here you guys can see we're just kind of doing a little bit of holding our ground here, making sure to keep up that bubble big time. Very important. We drop the Dawnbreaker on this guy, hit him with the bash afterwards. He had CC immunity going into that res, but the bash will still interrupt the res, so we do manage to get the kill on that guy there too. And we just try to start working on another target here, but I quickly shift targets to this guy who's attempting to res his dead player. We just beat him, the jabs, almost get the kill, and I decide not to stick out the last bit of jab poke there and instead just retreat a little bit, go into my bubble here. The resto heavy attack from that player is actually going to heal us for more than it will damage us, and there we get a great stun into the jabs. Unfortunately, the counter stun comes right away, and we aren't really able to stick that combo out. But we just keep kiting our way back to some safety here, keeping our buffs up, and I'm making sure to just throw down some pottles too so we can try to target a player that we can get a kill on here. We get a good target there. Unfortunately, all the yellow players converging on us. I think the blue player might have gone down there. And we're just going to go for a bit of a retreat and kite out the side here. The yellow players continuing to chase us. Just counter break that stun. And make sure we keep that bubble up for the dodge roll. Go for the, the shield up for the dodge roll and the bubble for our healing. It allows us to get back inside the keep here under this pressure. And now we're just going to do our best to try to kite these guys out a little bit. And you can see we've got a lot of players everywhere attacking us. This bubble does so much work in that situation. You can just see the healing power when we were caught on the ground there. That was just a little bit of lag, unfortunately. We did have the resource to get out of it. And the bubble just doing so much work. And the one thing I really want to mention from this bubble is that we are kind of playing a hit point build, but we have the ability to be quick and pretty kitey on it too. And the bubble's going to snare people that hit us with direct attacks, which makes us even better at kiting them out on this kind of a build. There you can see I go for the Vigor, throw the circle down, all the yellow players quickly converge on top, and we're just going to reset our buffs again. And I think I want to go for a Dawnbreaker combo here if I remember correctly, but the yellow players are staying very, very grouped up. I decide to put a little bit of damage into this guard, and one player comes down here to fight us. We drop the Dawnbreaker on him right away, and the other enemy player drops down, throwing the heals on right away too. So we just come back to the side, making sure that when we use our positioning to reset, we get to a safe spot and then stand in our rune and kind of camp it. This fight, though, really annoying because we've got NPCs dropping a negate on us every 15 seconds. That makes it very hard to play any kind of camp gameplay because they'll just put a negate on my circles and then they're no longer effective. And there you can see we get actually hit really hard, I think, by an enemy Nightblade there. I throw down the circles again. Keeping that bubble up 100% of the time, so important. Then I go for a little bit of a distance break here, and none of the yellow end up following me. and I was kind of forced to do that just because we were taking so many negates from all the guards in that location. And we've got one last quick fight for you guys as we say our goodbyes. I'm sorry that I only have these 2 clips here. I didn't play very much on this build because I wanted to update it for everyone and then move on to some other projects. Of course, if you guys want to see a written guide to this build, check it out on my website, KristoferESO.com. We've got written guides to all of my other builds too. Give me a follow on Twitch for that live gameplay, and of course, follow me on Twitter if you guys want to keep up to date with me. If you want to send in clips for the top 5 or send in your own build to be featured on the channel, you can send that to KristoferESO@hotmail.com. We are sponsored by What the Fast. They're a VPN for gamers. They can give you better ping to your favorite games, and they're free to try for the first month. A link down below in the description for you guys. And then last but certainly not least, a massive thank you and a massive shout out to all of my patrons on Patreon. Without you guys, I couldn't do this job that I love so much. So thank you everybody for supporting. Thank you everybody just for tuning in and watching today. Of course, I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Have a great night, everyone.